We are learning more about Sayfullo Saipov as law enforcement digs into his past. Investigators say 2 months of planning went into Tuesday's attack and that he chose Halloween because he believed there would be more pedestrians out celebrating the holiday. Jeff Pegues has more on the suspect.
Until he was taken down by an alert New York City police officer, Sayfullo Saipov was not someone investigators seemed to view as capable of mass murder or even a threat.
Hey, I need an ambulance right here.
But while the 29-year-old married father of 3 wasn't himself the subject of a law enforcement investigation, an intelligence source tells CBS News he had some contact with individuals who were considered radicalized extremists, and at least one of whom was from his native Uzbekistan. John Miller, the NYPD's Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence and Counterterrorism, says investigators have been going through Saipov's past.
What were his communications? Who were they with? What was the content? What's relevant to this?
Saipov is from Uzbekistan, a hotbed of radicalization for young ISIS sympathizers, many of whom have gone on to fight in Syria and Iraq. He immigrated to the U.S. in 2010, settling in Ohio, where people who know him say he spoke little English and seemed to grow disillusioned, angry, and depressed even as he embraced Islam. Murat Makhmumanov is an Uzbek religious activist who knows the suspect.
After he moved from Ohio, I think he becoming more and more radicalized, and, maybe he got some teaching from internet.
Court documents filed late today show Saipov told investigators that he was, quote, inspired by ISIS videos he had watched on his cellular phone, including one video by ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and he wanted to kill as many people as he could.
He appears to have followed almost exactly to a T the instructions that ISIS has put out in its social media channels before, with instructions to their followers on how to carry out such an attack.
And investigators say Saipov practiced the attack. 9 days earlier, on October 22nd, he rented a truck and actually rehearsed the turns that he would have to make during the attack on Halloween. He also said that he wanted to fly the ISIS flag in his hospital room. Elaine?
Well, Jeff, in your piece you mentioned Saipov had communicated with extremists, yet was not the target of an investigation. Did law enforcement have their eyes on him in any capacity?
Well, he kept on popping up associated with some of the targets of these other investigations. So in some ways they did have him on their radar, but again, he was not the target. But they're still looking into that. But what they might find, especially after what we know now about the planning that went into this attack, they might at one point say, this is someone that they should have been watching because according to the court papers, which we have here on set with me, this was something that he'd been planning for about a year. And then 2 months prior to the attack, he decides, well, I'm going to use a truck to attack these people. So there was some planning going into this, and they're finding that on his cell phone devices as well.
Well, the FBI says it has found a second man in relation to the attack. What do we know about him and his connection to Saipov?
Well, late today they put his name out there, and it didn't take long for them to figure out where he was, because it seems minutes later they said, oh, we found him. And we're going to just leave it at that. So they didn't have too much to say about him. We're still digging into what type of relationship he may have had with the suspect, and maybe investigators are too.
Well, we know Saipov immigrated to Ohio in 2010 and that he has residences in Florida and New Jersey. What more can you tell us about his life here in the U.S.?
It just seems like, after reading these court papers, he just was not fitting in to life here in the U.S. And then you hear what people who knew him have to say now about him, that he seemed to have this growing anger, seemed disillusioned, and then we hear about all of this planning over the last year, and so he just didn't seem to be fitting in here. At least those are the accounts that we're getting from people who had interactions with him. But investigators, keep in mind, Elaine, are still trying to figure out, well, was he communicating with someone overseas? Was this the type of attack that was actually directed by ISIS? It may take more time for them to figure that out. But again, I'm really in a lot of ways, stunned by what they found on these 2 cell phones. There were 2 cell phones that he left behind at the scene of the attack, and one of the cell phones had about 3,800 images of ISIS-related propaganda. And upon reading that kind of information and what type of propaganda it was, there's all this talk about, these guys being inspired. This man seemed like he was obsessed with ISIS. It seemed like it was a little bit more than being inspired. It was obsessed. He was sort of a fanatic. And I think that's what investigators will find. And already they've gotten so many clues that they've now publicized in this court document.
All right, Jeff Pegues in Washington for us. Jeff, thank you.
My pleasure.